Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Andrew Woodley's film Outpost 11, which is a sort of dieselpunk psychological horror film. So the premise, so the world in which we find ourselves is set in the 1950s. But it's an alternative 1950s in which the British Empire is fighting the Prussians in the Second 100 Years' War. It is a global conflict, and the three people that we are following, Mason, Albert, and Graham, are on a listening outpost in Antarctica. This is This is an outpost that apparently is meant to do two main jobs. One is to intercept enemy transmissions and transmit them back to HQ, and the other is to do some kind of experimental research. It's not entirely clear what kind, because that isn't really a big part of the movie. And this is one of the weird quirks of Outpost 11. There's a number of things in there that probably don't need to be. Like they are not really developed or not really necessary to the actual story that's being told, but they get incorporated nonetheless. And sometimes it's fine. Sometimes they're just small, weird, quirky things. Like Graham has this bottle of something that he snorts, presumably some sort of stimulant or drug or something like that, and then he compulsively masturbates afterwards. That's fine. It's a weird thing. I don't think we needed it, but it's a weird thing. It doesn't, but like, I don't necessarily feel that we need a massive explanation for that. It's enough that Graham is an old soldier. He's been fighting it in this war his entire life, and he's psychologically fucked up. We can accept that. But like, they're doing experimental research, but what that research consists of, why it's important, what the goal of it is, we never find out. What we do see is that after they get orders to destroy the experimental research, Mason, who's the base commander, goes out, digs a hole, dumps a bunch of stuff in it, and lights it on fire. That's about the extent of what we learn about their experimental research, which was apparently crucial to their mission. So these are the three guys. You've got Graham, who again, he is an older guy. He's been a soldier his entire life. He's been serving in the military. He does not know anything else other than the military. And he's kind of fucked up because of that. Like, he basically torments Albert, who's a young conscript, who's not a very good soldier. Graham is forever criticizing him and making him go check the Omega engine. The Omega engine's a weird sort of thing. It's kind of, we don't know what its purpose is, actually. It seems like it might kind of be a boiler system or something at first glance, but it also seems to be at least somewhat alive, and there are parasites in it. And it seems and we know that because at one point Mason pulls out what looks like a squid with some tongs and just chucks it on the floor. The Omega engine seems to exert a weird psychological impact on people. Albert is deeply unsettled by being in the room, which is part of the reason why Graham always orders him to go check the levels of the Omega engine, is because he knows Albert hates it. Mason seems weirdly drawn to it. Like, he periodically, there's a large round, what seems like a central component to it, and it has a porthole with some bubbling orange fluid in there. And Mason will regularly go in and just sort of stare into that. And at one point, he actually pulls out his pistol. And there's a weird thing that they do. Graham does it toward the beginning when Mason first returns from hunting. And then Mason does it toward the end when Graham comes in from outside, where you initially point your pistol at the person coming in. And then you put the gun to your own head and basically ask for a code word. And if they don't give you the code word, you shoot yourself. Apparently that's protocol. Don't know why. That's another sort of weird thing that goes unexplained. But what happens over the course of the movie... Oh, and Mason is the commander, and he's sort of just like, whatever. We're here, we're doing this job, I think it's kind of pointless. I'm cynical and cool. I'm the sexy dude of this trio. So yeah, he's got those kinds of vibes. What happens over the course of the movie is that they become increasingly paranoid and possibly delusional. And this is one of the interesting things about this type of movie, right? Is when you have characters who are becoming paranoid and delusional, and you're seeing things from their perspective, it's hard to tell what's real and what's not real. Mason at one point goes to Outpost 10 because he's concerned about what's happening. They've gotten the orders to destroy their research. And Mason goes over, just trudges through the Antarctic, to try and find his friend Cranley at Outpost 10. Cranley, it turns out, is dead, along with all his dudes, because they had become increasingly paranoid and violent. Eventually, they killed themselves and each other. So, standard type of stuff. And Mason finds this documented in Cranley's journal. Meanwhile, back at Outpost 11, Graham has received a secret communication, which is probably his paranoia, but we don't really know, telling him that Albert has betrayed the king to join the Prussian Spider Alliance. Graham is an arachnophobe. And so his paranoid delusions kind of largely revolve around spiders and these like giant spiders that have joined with the Prussians to try and defeat the British and him. So Graham sends Albert into the Omega engine room, locks the door, cranks up the output on the Omega engine. Again, we don't know what it does, so, we're not really sure what is actually happening to Albert during this time. Albert is trying to keep the Omega engine basically from overloading, I guess. And at one point, one of the hoses, one of the tubes that contains some kind of fluid, disconnects and basically just sprays him across the eyes. So he's now basically just acided to the face. So he is now blind and in severe pain. Eventually, Graham comes back and basically drags him out and sets him up at the listening post, and then gets a phone call from a spider warning him that they're outside and that they want Albert, I guess. And so Graham goes out to fight the spiders. Mason comes back. Albert accidentally shoots him, manages to get out of the chair that Graham has tied him to, shoots Mason because he thinks that he is getting orders from General Lord Hall. Whether or not that's real, who knows? But he thinks he's shooting Graham. So now Mason is shot. Mason sends Albert into the Omega engine to Omega engine off because Mason believes that that's key to their paranoid delusions. Albert doesn't manage to shut it down. Mason kills himself when password. Albert eventually manages Graham in the Omega engine room and severely overload it with the impression that it's a weird movie. Actually, a reasonably good movie, but is trying to do a lot of stuff, and it's a lot of stuff and doesn't make that much sense. There's a lot of influences here that you people like H.P. Lovecraft, people like David Lynch, but set in this, again, sort of Dieselpunk world of sort of World War II type equipment, but with the advanced machinery of the Omega engine. So, yeah, there's a lot going on, and it's complicated, and I think it's one of those things where the ambition of the movie has probably somewhat exceeded its grasp. But for a low-budget film, I actually think it's remarkably good at pulling together a lot of disparate elements and making them at least reasonably coherent.